I mean, I guess what I want to start with is Kate Winslet and the way that she brought the project to you, if that's indeed what happened. Because I know that you've, of course, worked with her as a cinematographer with The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Yes, that is what happened. In fact, Kate and I have been friends since Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And, we'd always been talking about looking for a project to work on together. And it wasn't until 2018, which is a number of years after Eternal. We shot Eternal in 2002 when it came out in 2003. And in the interim, we often would, hang out at each other's houses and that kind of thing. But it wasn't until 2018, which was 5 years into Kate working on trying to get a script together, that she came to me with the script. And she said, I know you've been directing, because I was directing episodic, like I was part of Catch-22 with George Clooney, and I did the first season of Ozark. And I've been doing, Legion and other episodic. And then I had already had directed my feature documentary, which was, nominated for an Academy Award and won the Emmy. So I had, a history of directing already. And so she came to me with the script and said, here's the script about Lee Miller, would you like to direct it?
And so how much did you know about Lee Miller? I mean, from what I gather, there's a group of people who have known about her for a long time, and then your film is going to be introducing her to a lot of people as well.
Yeah, I mean, way back when I knew about Lee Miller after I was in university, and I had taken a photography class at Rhode Island School of Design in Rhode Island. And back then, I was looking at photographers and their work, and I was particularly interested in Lee Miller's work because she comes from a surrealist group. So she was really interested in putting two different objects together and creating a new meaning with them. Or she was experimenting with light and solarization. And of course, I was very interested in all of that too, because I had just come into photography while I was in university. So, so I knew about her. I knew less about her as a war photographer, as a war correspondent, because she also was a writer. And so it wasn't until later when I read the books of her son, Anthony Penrose, which he wrote The Lives of Lee Miller and Lee Miller's War, that I got to know much more about her in her later years. She was a middle-aged woman who decided to take the camera and go off to war, which was pretty incredible at the time, because women were doing that. But what was interesting about Lee, and which I really admired in her, is that she wasn't going to be held back by convention, as you see in the film.
Yeah.
But also she chose to look at it differently. Her point of view was very different, and she chose to look at basically what was around the frame or beyond the frames of just combat photography and combat war. She was interested in what's happening to the people around. What is the fallout? What do we see after, the battle has come and gone? What was the war effort of women? Women were largely invisible. We didn't know what they were doing during the war, but because of Lee Miller and because of Audrey Withers, her editor, these stories were being shared with women in a fashion magazine of all places, which was highly unconventional and very progressive thinking. So,
yeah, I mean, before we get into talking about the film, which is so amazing, why do you think it took so long to develop a script and pick the right approach? I mean, the script focuses on a very specific part of her life that is less well known.
yeah, well, before I came to the Lee Miller story, I had been working on a script about Emily Dickinson,
Mm.
and which was a script that was given to me. And part of the thing about that script, and one of the common pitfalls of what would be a so-called biopic, is that the structure of the film is very event-based. It's like this happens and then that happens and then that happens in a person's life, and you just go from A to Z. which is boring and also doesn't really tell us anything new. And this being a film, and the difference between why not write a book versus why are you making a film about this person's life is, to be able to find the story that is the story that takes place within the world of the film, that has a beginning, middle, and an end. And so the same kind of concerns came to me when I read the first rendition of the script. I said to Kate, I said, we need to work on the structure because this is much more event-based and there's lots of great elements in the script already, but we need to restructure it. We need to have a structure that's much more cinematic. And that's when we brought in Liz Hanna to help us to restructure it in the writing. And that's why it takes so long. I mean, anybody who gets a film done, is a miracle worker. I mean, it's really difficult to make films. It's hard to get films financed. I mean, even Kate Winslet, when she tried to first go out to try and get financing for this film, was patronized too. And, it's like, well, why do you want to make a story about this person? So, making films is challenging. And so this film, it needed the time it took to get it done. And it's like, I say that about films also because the film that I made, my feature documentary, which was started out as a thesis film in the mid 80s. And I didn't finish it right away because I couldn't tell the story I wanted to tell. I couldn't get the archival footage I wanted. I couldn't tell the story I wanted to tell. So I didn't finish it, even though people said, when are you going to finish that film? I said, I can't finish it yet because I don't have the elements to the story yet. So it wasn't until many years later that I was able to go and finish it. And, so I tell people who have their thesis films they never finished or thesis books or whatever it is. And I go, it's never too late. You can go back. And I finally finished the film and, won the Emmy for it and got nominated for an Academy Award. It's never too late.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, in terms of the production, I mean, it feels like it would have been a big challenge to direct a film of this scale. I mean, just the locations where you're shooting, the action in the film. What was that like? What were some of the biggest challenges in getting this thing made?
Well, I've worked on many, many films.
Yeah.
And to me, it's filmmaking is about problem solving, and it's finding the right locations and trying to make it work within the budget and the schedule. I would say the most challenging thing about this film was the schedule, because originally we were going to shoot 11 weeks, then that got dropped down to 10 weeks, and then we were shooting it 9 weeks over 3 countries, which is a lot, and very, very tight schedule. And we only, in European filmmaking, it's 10-hour days. In America, we have 12-hour days. So 10 hours is a really short amount of time to shoot a lot of material. And so I had to be very, very prepared about knowing exactly what I was going to do every single day so that we wouldn't go overtime. So challenging because the actors didn't have any rehearsal time. We didn't have time for rehearsals. So we had to be very precise, and the actors had to be prepared, and we had to preempt them with information about the characters and help them, and Kate and I worked closely together to try and do that so that when they came in, they would go to a wardrobe fitting the day before and then we would be on set. So, I know a lot of filmmakers who have to think on their feet, but one would say that in filmmaking, either you have time or you have money. And so because we didn't have either, we had to make the best of both worlds. And one of my thing also has been, how to make it feel much more for whatever we have, to make it a lot for a less. And, I think I learned that very, very early on. In the first feature film I ever shot was we had no money. everybody worked for $100 a day, and we shot for 10 days on $15,000. So you have to do a lot with a little. And
Yeah.
I think that's what you do to make the production value worth it.
I want to make sure there's so much to talk about with this movie. I want to make sure we talk about just how you approached filming the concentration camp, sequences. I mean, that's obviously difficult to think about how to visualize that, and so powerful. So what was the way you approached it?
Well, I knew that in the beginning that we couldn't try to make Dachau exactly what Dachau was. I wasn't going to literally try to show Dachau, because why? I mean, there have been many stories, many films that have been made about World War II. What's different about this? But I didn't feel the pressure to have some huge concentration camp set. But I knew that we needed to find a place that was in the spirit of the truth and the spirit of the place. And I also knew that it would be much more interesting to see what the camp was and experience it through the eyes and the emotions of Davy and Lee. And so that helped to focus the point of view of what we would see in the film and how we would see it. And so when I was looking for the locations, the Hungarians showed me the folders of the concentration camp set that they have in Hungary. And, I looked at the pictures, and I said, well, this sadly is not going to work, but it's much more an Auschwitz kind of feeling than it is of Dachau, which was very, Dachau was one of the first concentration camps that was established. And it was actually a munitions factory for making weapons, making ammunition. And they had put political prisoners there. So it was a very different kind of a place. So I said to the Hungarians, let's try to maybe look at military bases. Let's look at something which is akin to that. And, we were looking and looking, and it didn't come up until there was a folder that was misplaced in the airports folders. So we were looking at airports, and I happened to open this folder, and the moment I opened it, I said, that's Dachau. The same feeling, the trees, there was something about it that was reminiscent of that place, the tone. And that's where we ended up shooting.
Right. I want to make sure we, oh, sorry. No. I want to make sure we talk about some of the performances. Obviously, Kate is amazing in the film. But before we talk about her, I want to ask about Andy Samberg, who is great in this role. And he's of course, thought of as a comedian first. So I understand he had some trepidation, but could you talk about just working with him?
Andy is an incredible actor. And I'll tell you why, because for an actor to step outside of genre, it is scary, it's the abyss. And, Andy took it on wholeheartedly. And the idea of having Andy Samberg play David E. Sherman came from one of the writers, Marion Hume, who suggested in an out of the box idea that Andy Samberg played Davy Sherman. And both Kate and I looked at each other like, oh my God, wow, And what was great about that was the fact that, he also has a family history that could connect him to this situation. But also we thought, oh, he would be able to do it. So what was very unusual for an A-list actor is Andy himself suggested to do an audition. And so Kate and I auditioned him, and we both knew that he could do it. And it was pretty remarkable what he was able to do. And, Andy, in his brilliant performance, really, is part of the heart and soul of the emotional core of this story as well.
Absolutely. One interesting thing, you were talking earlier about the structure of the film, and the way that you use the interviews with Lee later in life is really crucial to the way the film is held together, and also really interesting performance in those scenes by Kate. So could you talk about those, how you filmed and directed those framing device of that interview.
Well, the thing about Kate is that Kate Winslet as an actor is that, you know, she's very prepared. And also she has this ability and range to be able to take on the persona of that character. And so when she was playing Lee Miller in her 70s,
Hmm.
she took on the physicality of Lee Miller as well as, you know, her voice, you know, her point of view, her attitudes, everything about that, you know, aspects of the character she incorporated into her performance. And never once are we aware of her being aware of herself. She's very much in the mind's eye of the character. And even, you know, as Lee Miller in her 70s, you know, after I called cut, she would get up and walk away as Lee Miller. You know,
Hmm.
she had a gait like you know, a person in their 70s, and, you know, walking away just in her own head. And, you know, so she's a very obviously an actor of great range and talent and ability. And throughout this whole film, you can see the range of her brilliance.
I'll ask, I know we just have a few minutes left. So the last thing I want to ask is the way that Kate shows us Lee at work as a photographer, you know, the way she sort of sets up photographs and thinks as a photographer. I'm imagining you were able to offer her something there.
Yeah, well, we talked about, you know, about Lee as a photographer, and Kate actually had a Rollie. We got her a Rollie, and she worked with a camera guy who deals with 2.25 cameras to be able to learn the Rolleiflex really well, because she knew that, you know, Lee Miller would have known that camera like her hand. You know, much like me, you know, when I was a cinematographer, the camera was an extension of my body. It was an extension of my eyes, extension of my hand. And likewise, you know, Kate knew that she had to be able to load that camera really quickly and without thinking, which is what she does in the scene. But we both kind of discovered when we were shooting, you know, it's like, oh, let's see if we can get the shot through the viewfinder, which, you know, we laugh because in the Rollie, you know, the image is backwards. So, you know, we said, oh, you think anybody will notice that it's backwards? Backwards, because that's the way the optics in the camera work.
Right.
You know, but we knew that it was really important to be able to capture that discovery of the photographer once they enter into the place, you know, the set or the scene.
Well,
So
absolutely.
me as a director, it was great to be able to set the elements of the scene in the spirit of what it was. So we experience with the photographer the choices that she makes and what she's going to photograph and how she photographs it.
Well, thank you so much. It's just all around such a great job that you did. So I'm so happy to have shown the film and to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
David. Good luck.
Thank you. Bye-bye.